You are about to listen to another episode of That Sports Guys podcast, hosted by Craig Forrestall. Find Craig on Twitter at that_sports_guy. The That Sports Guys podcast is proudly featured by NFL Draft Diamonds, your draft coverage king. So sit back, relax, and enjoy some football talk.
Hello and welcome to another episode of That Sports Guys podcast. I am Craig Forrestall. You may know me from Twitter as at that_sports_guy. But this time we got something a little bit different. You're always hearing me talking to potential guys that are going to be in the league in about 9 to 10 months. But how do we know they're league bound? That's why we got Ryan Roberts with us this evening. Ryan Roberts, you can find him on Twitter, Rise and Draft. He's the director of scouting for NFL Draft Bible, an NFL draft analyst for the Dynasty Draft Room. And if that isn't enough, he co-hosts the NFL Draft Prospects podcast. Ryan, what's going on with you tonight, man?
Not much, Craig. I'm, just trying to get through the daily life of still COVID action, man. How's everything on your end?
Everything's good. Everything's good over here. I'm a little bit, confused because the Dolphins and the Jags got fans tonight up in Jacksonville. But when you look around at the rest of the league, you see the no fans. It just makes you wonder, like you said, in this whole COVID world, when are we going to see the sellouts and have the stadium noise? Because the fake noise, man, it is weird. I'll tell you that.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll say Florida is one place in particular that probably shouldn't be doing that right now. I'm in New Jersey, so the New Jersey's in the green right now. Pennsylvania's been pretty good for a while now, and the Philadelphia Eagles don't have any fans at all. And then I'm looking down south, and they're all having fans. I'm just like, I think this is a little ass backwards. I don't know what's happening right now.
Yeah, but you know what they say, Florida's gonna Florida, so we can't let anyone down.
That's right.
But Ryan, I want to know, because you're so dialed in as a scout and an analyst, just what is your football story? Are you a player? Are you a coach? Are you both?
So I played high school football here in New Jersey, and I played briefly at Frostburg State University, which is a Division III school in Maryland. It's right outside of West Virginia. It's way west Maryland, and I played very briefly there because unfortunately I was a linebacker who has bad shoulders. I've torn both labrums of my shoulders. So, playing that position with bad shoulders, it wasn't very advantageous to continue playing. So, after only a season, I was like, I'm just going to go back home. So I finished out my, degree at Rowan University. And, I was kind of in between on how I wanted to stay in touch with football. Because for me, football had, been the dream for me since I was 8 or 9 years old, watching The Greatest Show on Turf. And I'm just I need to figure out what I'm going to do to stay around the game. So I actually went back to my old high school, Maple Shade High School, and Coach Nicolino asked him, just if there was a way that I could, be an assistant coach and do all type of stuff. So I volunteered for a year, and then I became a full-time track and field and football coach at the school. And I've been at a couple different schools now at this point. So I've been coaching for 7 years on the high school level. This is my first year not doing it, just, time-wise, and wife is pregnant, so it's just kind of changing a little bit of the demands of timing right now. So first year not playing football, so it was kind of another trend. Coaching football, so it was kind of the next transition here, right? I need to stay away around football. Luckily, I started doing this with NFL Draft Bible last year, and I've been freelance writing for a little while now. So it's a way to stay around the game, and it's become something now where I'm making a little bit of a living off of it, and hopefully, that success in the industry continues for me right now.
And you talked about getting involved with coaching, playing briefly at the college level. But what was that moment? Were you watching a game? Were you helping one of your friends break down film or breaking down film at the high school level when you just said, you know what? I could do this for guys that are trying to get themselves drafted too. What was that moment when you decided or that you realized you could do this for college players as well?
So it's a little funny. The NFL draft in my house, with my dad, it's kind of always been something that, keeps me and my dad really close together. He's a big draft guy, has been for his entire life. So it was something I grew up with, but I never really considered doing it much until actually when I began coaching, because, as a coach, you're you're watching film 24/7 to prepare for teams, right? Like each week. And that's really like I felt like my eye for the game really kind of, took a new level because I'd always kind of been interested in players going from college to the NFL, that transition, like what makes some players successful, what makes others not successful. Like that always was kind of a peak of an interest. But I really do, give a lot of credit to the coaching backgrounds, the ability to see the game at a deeper level, understand concepts offensively, defensively, where are weak spots, that type of thing. So when I'm watching film, I feel like I'm taking in not only from an evaluator's perspective, which I've kind of always been interested in, but then I also have like that coaching side where, it still pisses me off when a corner's getting burnt deep in cover 3. You know what I mean? Like it's always there. And, some people I feel like miss part of the evaluation because they don't value that part of it enough. So for me, it's just like multi-perspectives that have kind of been merged together. And, I think it's going on okay. I feel like a lot of people respect the work so far. But, if I had to pinpoint it, I would say that first year or two of coaching, really becoming more of a film junkie was really like the start of understanding how everything kind of fit together.
And now you talked about a lot of different points being involved in your scouting background. Do you have an individual process? Because I know everybody does it a little bit differently, whether it's the way that you put together your player list, whether it's the way you gather your information, maybe you have your own customized grading scale. How does scouting work for Ryan Roberts?
Yeah, so I do have my own individual grading scale. Most NFL teams, to my knowledge, from the scouts that I've talked to that have experience, usually work on a 9-point scale. For me, I go up to a 10-point scale. It's just I put it together before I really had gotten that background into scouting. So I work off of the 10-point scale. I'll say how I know who to target. I listen to everyone. I listen to probably 10 podcasts a day, and that's really no exaggeration, ranging from the draft dudes to Locked On NFL Draft, Move the Sticks, Lance Zierlein. Like I listen to so many people on a day-to-day basis. When you're beginning that like summer scouting period, I make a very tentative list. I'll go back to, every major conference in college football on the FBS, FCS level. And I'll just mark down like, oh, these are the juniors and sophomores that made all conference last year. Go back to recruiting rankings. Like, making the list, I think is really easy, right? Like you make it based upon, every asset that you have available. And then, I think that obviously the tough part, or I shouldn't say tough part, the real bulk of the work goes when you go in blind and you're not really understanding what to look for. And that's actually my favorite part. When I like to go watch film, I want to know as little about a player before I go and watch him. I want to go in blind, get my 3 games in, get a little bit of an understanding of them. And then after that, and I'm talking specifically about like the summer scouting period, then I go back and I'll look at interviews. I love listening to guys articulate what happened on the football field. I love going back and reading about their backstory, their bios, like where do they come from? What's their family like? What sets them apart? What makes them unique? I feel like that stuff is sometimes the missing elements that people don't consider as much. But, to simplify it as much as possible, we'll put together the rough lists. I like to watch 3 games, kind of like a cold watch. And then after that, I'm going to get into the background of the player. And then obviously throughout the next upcoming season, I'll go back, watch the new tape on them, 3 games at minimum. Usually I can pretty much pin a guy down at that point, and then I'll finalize the draft grade, and then we move into the off-season stuff with all-star games and combine invites and all that good stuff.
And I just want to ask you, because with someone like Joe Burrow, right? Mm-hmm. When Burrow was going into his senior year at LSU, he was someone that some people had as like a day 3 guy from pretty much a lot of things that I've heard people say.
Sure.
And then he, skyrockets all the way up to round 1. And I know that's a situation that happens every 10, 15 years or so. It's not always very common where that guy comes out of nowhere, goes from 6th, 7th round grade to 1st overall. Mm-hmm. But when you saw that with Joe Burrow, when you were doing a preliminary watch on him, did you say to yourself, this guy might be a little bit better than than what people are saying right now? Or was he someone that just had such growth from end of year junior year to first game senior year that it really was like a different player?
For me, it was a completely different player, to be completely honest. It's something where, like, especially in that period where you're doing those preliminary evaluations during the summer, guys that kind of reel you into wondering what could be the next step are the guys that have incredible physical traits, those guys that are very projectable. For me, Joe Burrow's best assets is from a mental acumen, his understanding, his command of an offense, those things that you can't really quantify with how strong is his arm, how fast is he, like those physical traits. So for me, I mean, I would be completely lying if I sat here and said, like, oh, I wrote down Joe Burrow's name and I'm like, you know what? I see it. There's a possibility that he could vault to being one of the top quarterbacks in the class. That would be a complete lie. So for me, it was just he was a completely different player. And obviously he got into LSU late the year before, didn't have a ton of time, was working with a completely different offense, different offensive coordinator. Obviously, he settled in with Joe Brady this past year, and had an insane year. And every chip that needed to fall fell the right possible way at the right possible time for Joe Burrow. So those things are a little harder to quantify and get excited about in that preliminary process. But as you know, Craig, the quarterback position, it's such a multi-layered thing that you can't really understand fully the picture of a quarterback prospect until you hear how he interviews, sit down with him one-to-one, whether that is you just listening to the interview or you actually speaking with him, seeing how he commands himself, talking to the coaches about what type of player he is. So those are the things that made Joe Burrow vault to that next level. But for me, I wasn't able to quantify into that type of leap, just strictly on the tools that Joe Burrow has.
And Ryan, I know we talked about how we were going to go about our questions, but right now we jumped on quarterbacks. I want to jump ahead to something we had saved for a little bit later, and
Sure.
that's Trevor Lawrence, because we have a mutual friend in the industry, Warren McCarty, and I was texting Warren over the weekend, and he sent me a screenshot of Trevor Lawrence from the Citadel game. And fundamentally, it was a picture where Trevor Lawrence looked like he could work on some things possibly. Just where are you with Trevor Lawrence? Do you think he has any flaws? Do you think he is that ideal quarterback prospect, that they're talking about, best since Andrew Luck or whatever it might be? Where are you with Trevor Lawrence?
Well, that's really funny, Craig, because Warren actually texted me the same picture, man. He had the ball super low down the side. Yeah. So, I mean, yes, Trevor Lawrence is not a finished product by any means. When I talked to Warren a few months ago, he pointed that out to me, where he really lowers the ball. That's going to lead to some ball security issues. It's going to slow down his release at times, which is going to be a very big problem at the next level. That as quick a release as you possibly can have to hit those tighter windows is obviously essential for the success of a quarterback. And ball security, I'm right outside of Philly again, so I can't tell you how many strip sacks I've seen of Carson Wentz over the last couple of years. So it's been a little tough, but I will say for Lawrence, man, like, he's the best quarterback I've ever evaluated. I'll say that, without even a hesitation to it. I didn't break down Andrew Luck, right? Like I was still playing football at that point. So I will say, yes, I think Trevor Lawrence is the real deal. I think there are things to work on. Obviously, I think he presses a little too hard. I think he has good eyes. I just think that he presses because he's just been a guy that's been so much more physically gifted than 90% of the defensive players he's faced, that he can make some of these throws that most people wouldn't even consider making. I think that he's a player that you need to reel back a little bit and just understand that, hey, check down's fine, man. Take what you got. Live to play another down. Take a sack. Throw the ball out of bounds. Like it's not always the worst case scenario, right? So like for me, I would yes, 6'6", 220 plus pounds. He's an athlete. He has an incredible arm. His ball placement is mostly good. Sometimes it's a little streaky just because, like Warren showed us, there's some things, there's inconsistencies with his technique. But for me, I listen to the guy talk. I see his posts on Twitter of him being a leader. I have no questions about the person that we're getting with him. And then with all that talents-wise and the success that he's that he's been able to have in his short career, I think he has everything. I would be very surprised if Trevor Lawrence wasn't one of the better quarterbacks relatively early in his career, obviously dependent on situation. But yeah, I definitely do think he's the real deal, and I would be one to say that he is the best quarterback probably since Andrew Luck. But again, I haven't been doing this long enough to make that claim, unfortunately.
And now let's jump over to another type of player that is often talked about or discussed when you're going through scouting reports and different things like that. And that is the effort player. So when the common fan hears effort player, they just automatically think he hustles or plays to the whistle. But what is an effort player? How does that show up on film? What does that mean to you?
Mm-hmm. I feel like effort player, when you label someone, sometimes some people think that's the most negative thing in the world, which is pretty funny when you think about it. I mean, for me, it's very easy to see it. Obviously, at different positions, it'll show up, right? Like if I'm a defensive end on the weak side, chasing down from the backside. There's all different types of effort player. An offensive lineman hustling down to the third level on a screen, whatever it might be. You can see it. There's some guys that like to play football, and there's guys that live it. There's guys that, they are balls to the wall every second. You can tell that they love the game. They love their teammates. Offensive linemen, that in that example, they don't get a ton of publicity. They don't get a ton of credit. But you see those plays once in a while where an offensive lineman is like 30 yards downfield, and it really sums up the love for the game. And I mean, from a personal level, being a former player and a coach, I love that stuff, man. That stuff sticks with me when I'm watching film and I see a flash play like that. I'm like, dude, that guy can play on my team. And I think that part of what is lost also is everybody wants to talk about the day one picks, right? The guys that are going to be the face of the franchise, quote unquote. But from everybody that I've talked about in the scouting career, and I've had the fortune of developing a really close relationship with David Turner, who is an 18-year vet in the scouting industry. And, he tells me, and I understand this very well now, is that the scouts make their money on day 3, that round 4 through 7. And so what does effort player mean to me? It means a guy that can fill out a roster, a guy that's going to play special teams, a guy that can wear a multitude of hats, and they can be successful. And no matter what position they're in, they're going to play hard. And if they can give you reps on defense or on offense, that's great. But those guys are the backbone of the roster that usually show up very discreetly. We always think about, the touchdown that won the game, the goal line stand. What about the punt that was downed inside the 10-yard line, as a flip, a forced fumble on a kickoff return, whatever it is? Like, there's so many plays in football and football is a momentum game. There's so many plays that completely flip the momentum of a game. The biggest play, and sorry, I'm going off on a huge tangent here, but
it's all good.
The Rams Eagles game this past week, the Rams won 37-19, but like, at one point, it was a ball game, even though they physically dominated the Eagles, because Cooper Kupp, they forced a fumble inside the 10-yard line, and I don't even know who the punt player was that caused that fumble, but that completely shifted the game. I guarantee it wasn't a starting player; it was an effort play that completely flipped the momentum of a football game. So when you ask me what an effort player is, a guy that no matter what is going to be there, a guy that has the ability to play special teams, a guy that has the ability to impact a football game, even when he might not be that player that everybody's going to talk about in the press the next day.
Now, Ryan, I want to ask you about what I call the pleasant surprise player. And for me, the pleasant surprise player is when you're watching film, you got someone, like you said, you're going through your 3-game watch, trying to figure out who it is. But maybe as you're watching the guy that you ID'd, you see one of his teammates keep popping up on film, keep popping up on film, keep popping up on film. Now, take me through your process from that point. What do you do then?
So I'm a little old-fashioned to a degree. I always have a Google Doc up for notes, but I also have a little pad with pen and pencil that I usually write some miscellaneous notes, because sometimes it's just a little easier to write stuff while you're watching by hand. So. Yep. If I see a number that keeps flashing, number 21 on defense keeps flashing, I'll write down 21. And then after the film, if he's a guy that really excited me, I'll go and I'll do a little bit of the background, just to not super in depth, but I want to find out what number is he, what grade is he in, and when is he draft eligible, those type of miscellaneous things. And if he's a player that really interests me, just from meeting some of those parameters, then I'll put him on the list. And eventually I'm going to get to him. And then, obviously that cold watch again is going to happen again with the new player. I'm going to have my eyes strictly on him. And then after that, I'll start doing the background information and start figuring out where does this player fit. And that's honestly, probably my favorite part is finding those hidden gems. And I mean, you work for Draft Diamonds, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like that's the business, finding those under the radar guys that, because this is like the biggest thing, right? Is I always tell people, anybody can watch Trevor Lawrence and tell me that Trevor Lawrence is going to be good. Anybody can watch Penei Sewell and tell me that he's a potentially dominant offensive lineman. I want to see those guys that, and again, this goes back to making your money on day 3. Find me those guys that can impact a football team that nobody else talks about. That's the fun part, and that's kind of what that is, right? Like you designate a player, and then you go back, and then hey, you might have the next big thing at the end of the day.
And now let's go ahead. Let's stick there. Let's talk about sleepers. So, who are some of the players that you evaluated last year that fell into that sleeper category or started getting buzz a little bit later and had a kind of quick ascend during the draft process?
So it's kind of an easy answer, but and I'm going to give a little bit of a backstory. Jeremy Chin ended up being, a second round pick to the Carolina Panthers. I actually did an interview with him like right after his junior year, maybe like a half a month after that. And I just had watched this kid from Southern Illinois, playing too high, playing single high at times, playing in the slot. Like, he's all over the place. Number 2, he's playing corner at times too. Like, who is this guy? And then I wasn't surprised because I anticipated him being a long, really nice athlete, in which he was. And then, of course, he goes to the Senior Bowl and he really starts to blow up, and he starts to make that huge ascend. So I wasn't really surprised about Chin. One other guy that I'll mention quickly is Stanley Thomas Oliver, who was drafted by the Panthers as well, the cornerback from FAU. He was a guy that was a wide receiver for the majority of his FAU career, the first couple, and then he hadn't played corner for like a year and a half. And again, I was watching their film, and I'm like, who's 21? Like, I wasn't even watching him. I don't even remember who I was watching. I was just like, who's this corner? Like, he looks long, he looks athletic, and then he gets drafted by the Panthers. He makes the football team this year. He's very talented. I don't think he's starting yet, but I think that he's a guy that, again, like, why was he not getting more buzz? He went to the combine, ran in the 4.4s at almost 6'1". He had ball production. He's got a wide receiver background. Like, that sounds to me like the building blocks for a very successful corner. So if I had to pinpoint just a couple guys from that last year, I didn't even notice that I was going to pick 2 Carolina Panthers when I started talking. But those are a couple guys that really kind of just stood out on the top of my head.
And then let's stick with last year's draft class. Like you said, NFL Draft Diamonds, a big focus for us is those small school guys. For me, I had James Robinson in my final top 100, and he's about ready to square off against the Dolphins on Thursday Night Football here in about an hour. So he has seemed to be someone that's popped initially for me from my, skill position group. Have you had any impact rookies from skill positions in your top 100 so far?
Yeah, so everybody really cooled off on this guy, and they just completely backpedaled. I loved Laviska Shenault at Colorado. I loved Laviska Shenault. I had a first round grade on him throughout.
Same here.
Yeah, and there was nothing at the combine that made me upset because he had what did he pull a hamstring or something when he was running the 40? Like, I knew he was fast. Like, you watch his film again. Like, that doesn't take a genius to watch Laviska Shenault and know that he is faster than everybody else on the field. He's a legit 4'4" dude at 225 pounds. Like, he is an absolute animal. And he's starting to get some touches for the Jaguars, both in the run and the pass game. He's kind of that big gadget guy, but I think that there's so much more that he can be as a wide receiver, which is what I'm really excited about. And everybody started cooling off, like, oh, he should be like a late day 2 guy, whatever it is. Like, Dude, no. This guy's going to go on day 2 because he's injured and he's had some durability concerns. But nobody can tell me when you're watching Laviska Shenault that dude isn't a legitimate high-level athlete at the NFL level. And I'm happy, right now he's staying healthy. He's showing off a little bit. And I expect, obviously, you just mentioned a guy on Jaguars. I mentioned another one, right? Like, they have DJ Chark out now for the game. So I'm expecting Laviska Shenault to get a little more volume tonight. And I'm hoping for my fantasy team's sake that is true as well. And I have James Robinson on the fantasy team tonight too. So I'm hoping for a little bit of offensive firepower from the Jags tonight.
Yeah, I went Jags heavy in fantasy too. I got Minshew, I got Chark, and I got James Robinson. So I went Jags heavy this year. So I'm 100% with you there. Now, since we're on the whole topic of guys getting drafted, we talked about sleepers. I'll let you be the first one to introduce us to a couple of guys from the 2021 class. So who are some guys now that are draft eligible for the 2021 draft that nobody knows about?
So a couple of these guys I feel like are getting a little more talk of recent, but guys that I really love and I've been supportive of all of these guys for several months now. First guy, I think you'll appreciate him being an FCS guy, Spencer Brown, Northern Iowa. I'm going to bang the table every day for this guy, man. He is legit 6'8 plus. He is a legit 317 plus. Former high school tight ends playing 8-man football over there in Iowa. He is an incredible athlete. You see, and I think that this can't be undersold. A lot of people have this misnomer that offensive linemen don't have to be athletic. Name me the best offensive tackles in the NFL: the Lane Johnsons, the Terran Armsteads, the Tyron Smiths, all those dudes. They are legitimate athletes out there. They are stupid athletes. And for me, Spencer Brown, he checks the size attributes, the athleticism attributes, and he's still a little raw. But for me, that's what I like about it, because I'm envisioning in this process right now how good he can be in a year or two. He benched 500 pounds over the offseason. Everything is there for him. And the two biggest things that I love when I watch offensive tackles, aside from, hitting the length and the size thresholds that we always talk about, is one, core strength. He has it. He's got a very strong core. Two, flexibility. He gets in some bad positions sometimes, but he's such a flexible athlete that even when he's put into a tough situation, he's able to redirect his body, get his base back under him, and then able to press and extend and then get back into a solid position. I think that those things are so undersold for offensive tackle. So Spencer Brown, Northern Iowa, I think he's going to be an early day 2 guy when it's all said and done. I know he's on the Senior Bowl radar a little bit. So Spencer Brown's a guy. Real quick, Hunter Long, tight end from Boston College. He had a great week this past week. He was a guy that when we actually talked to the pro liaison over at Boston College, and we had gone through the list of all their offensive linemen and talked about a couple of their linebackers and all these guys. And then we asked, is there another guy that we should be talking about? This is like several months ago. And he's like, oh, yeah, you didn't even ask about the best one. Hunter Long, he's going to be a first-round pick when all is said and done. I'm like, oh, okay. So I started looking at him. I'm like, oh, okay, I can see why. He reminds me a little bit of Hunter Henry that's plays for the Chargers. I think that's a decent little comp for him. And couple Tulsa dudes. I'm going to throw a few more out because this is my favorite part, Craig. So Tulsa dudes this past weekend, Zaven Collins, strong side linebacker, listed at 6'4", 260 pounds, absolutely ridiculous build for the position. Plays in kind of like that Anthony Barr role for them. I think if you're playing over fronts, you're getting him down on the line of scrimmage. I think that he can set an edge. I think he can get some sacks for you. He can cause some havoc in the backfield. Like him a ton. And then their corner, I know Ali Green's getting a little bit of talk. I think he's talented. But I'll tell you, Caleb Evans, number 26, the other corner, I think that's their best defensive back. I think he's very talented, 6'2". He's long. He's athletic. Love him a ton. And then the last guy, getting a little more talk. I feel like he's a little more well-respected in draft Twitter than he is by, I think he's like the 140-something ranked player in like TDN's draft board or whatever. It's J.C. Horn, who's Joe Horn's son, cornerback out of South Carolina. A lot of people really like the McQuamu kid, the other corner, man. I think J.C. Horn is so much better, so much. He's played slot. He's played outside. I think he's one of those matchup guys that can play any wide receiver in any spot. Like, he's that dude that can literally shadow a player, whether he's, he's like the Chris Godwin eraser, right? This Godwin plays so much inside, plays in the slot. I think J.C. Horn's one of those guys that you say, hey, you got him no matter where he goes on the football field. So those are a few guys, a long-winded response for you, but I know, with your draft diamonds, I'm sure that you appreciate a couple of the smaller school guys at least.
Oh, love the small school guys. And like you said, I had a chance to speak to Spencer Brown, and Spencer's a phenomenal kid. He's a great kid. And it's funny because when we were talking, kind of the soft stuff early on, where did you grow up? Like you said, he played tight end, 8-man football, real small town. But then once we transitioned, and like you said, we started getting into the nitty-gritty of O-line play. It's like a switch flipped with him. And you could just hear his tone of voice and the focus that just came through in the conversation when we started talking about that. And that's a dude that's really tuned into football. So I'm with you. I think that he's going to be a steal for someone at the next level. And since we're talking about drafts, now, Ryan, you are the general manager. I know you're a Rams fan, so I won't say that the Rams are in a rebuild and they brought you in to rebuild. So whoever you want it to be for the rebuild, how would you draft? What would your draft philosophy be? Would you trade back? Would you best player available, build the offensive and defensive line first? How would you go about it?
So I'm a little old-fashioned, I would say. I think that if you're just a guy that's best player available, I feel like you can't ever go wrong, with like the Baltimore Ravens, going back to the Ozzie Newsome days. Like, they just always let guys fall into their lap. They wouldn't overthink players. The best player was always there. They would take the best player and they would figure out how to formulate it. But for me, like, I'm an offensive line, defensive line guy. I'm always a guy that's going to be built inside out, because no matter what, if your offensive line is not good, I mean, we see it all over the league, right? Like, some of these quarterbacks are struggling, and usually it's because bad offensive line play. They can't get a run game going. The play action game isn't working. Like, usually it comes back to that. I'm definitely a build inside out guy, and I know some people won't love that, because of the increased importance of how cornerback play has really risen over the last few years. But for me, like, quarterback, offensive line, defensive line, then you start to build out. I think that's really important. On defense, obviously, also free safety. I still think that a middle linebacker is a valuable asset that can affect the game on 3 downs. I'm not like one of those guys that is like, it's the running back of the defense. It doesn't matter anymore. I think that position is still valuable. So I'm building inside out. And, I'm going to figure the skill positions out because, again, like, it's easier to make bad, I don't want to say bad, below average or average skill position look good over making a below to average offensive line look good.
And Ryan, let's just finish it here. And then let's get ourselves some Dolphins Jags to get that Thursday night going.
Yeah.
We've talked about Andrew Luck. We've talked about Trevor Lawrence. We've talked about Joe Burrow. We've talked about a couple of different quarterbacks, whether it was planned or not tonight. And now we just talked about the draft. So the final question, Ryan, why is it so hard to evaluate quarterback play?
Because there's just so many layers to it, It's ever evolving, right? Like, obviously, the Russell Wilsons, the Kyler Murrays of the world have made you reevaluate how important those size thresholds are to the position, right? Like, to start there, the game is just so ever evolving that those things are things that you always need to take into account. What does the game look like now? But, like, the thing with quarterback play is they are the face of the franchise. They are the leader of the offense and of the team the minute that they step foot onto that field, no matter if they are ready for it or they're not. So we need to do the homework, man. Like, you need to not – it's not simply – putting on the film and saying, like, oh, strong arm, accurate, can run a little bit, he can read a defense, like, that's it. Put your stamp down. It's really the backstory, right? Because, like, we've seen guys completely bust, like Jamarcus Russell, who didn't have a work ethic, Ryan Leaf that had a temper and just didn't understand how to be a professional. Everything is just so multi-layered that I need to actually listen to a guy talk, articulate a play. Does he get the game? What type of leader is he? Because, again, a leader of men, he has to be that one voice on the football field at all times. So there's just so many things that go into the quarterback evaluation. That's why it's the trickiest. excuse me, and I think that's why it's probably the biggest bust, percentage of any position, right? Because like there's just some guys that in the right situation they might be successful, but there's not many quarterbacks that truly can transcend the situation. So that also goes into the part of it. And I think that the actual evaluation is there's a physical profile, there's a mental acumen, and then there's a leadership ability that you all have to mesh into one. And I really feel like if a quarterback's missing out on one of those, they're maybe not going to be successful. If they're missing out on two, they're 100% not going to be successful. We always talk about checking boxes. I think it's even more important for quarterbacks to really hit those three criteria to be successful and then to be the face of a franchise potentially.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was a sneak peek into the scouting world of Ryan Roberts. Find him on Twitter at RisenDraft, RisenDraft, RisenDraft on Twitter. Ladies and gentlemen, that is Ryan Roberts. I am Craig Forrestall. Until next time, stay safe and be easy.
Hey everybody, Craig Forrestall. Thanks for tuning in and listening to another episode of That Sports Guys podcast. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at that_sports_guy to catch all the latest updates and podcast episodes. Until next time, stay safe and be easy.